Welcome. 100 years. Who knew? I know that this audience is full of friends, and it's wonderful to welcome you all back to this centennial annual meeting on liberal education, global flourishing, and the equity imperative. We're thrilled to have you here. For those of you who are just coming and just getting to know us, I'm Carol Geary-Schneider. I'm the president of the association, and it is just a huge honor and thrill to be part of this effort to take stock, and this is our mission for this meeting, of where we are going with liberal education, which we view as the world's most empowering form of education as we move into the 21st century. Who will benefit from a liberal education? What kind of work will we be better able to do in the world because of a liberal and empowering education? And the equity imperative. How do we make sure that we move from where we are now, which is a deeply stratified higher education system, to one that takes seriously its responsibility to provide a genuinely horizon-expanding, opportunity-rich education for all our students, especially our first-generation students. That's our mission, that's our work, and that is our subject this evening. So let me do just a little census of those of you who are here. How many of you is this your first session? You're just joining us for the Centennial Annual Meeting. Quite a few. How many of you have been here all day long, and you really are the true lifelong learners? Thank you. Welcome back. Because this session is a bridge between our Centennial Symposium, which was a very deep dive today into what we view as the desirable, needed directions in liberal education, and the larger annual meeting, which will be looking at incredible numbers of institutions that are, in their own ways faithful to their mission, to their students, to their context, changing what we mean by hands-on, engaged, public-spirited, and digitally adept, intelligent liberal education. So our topic tonight is to explore what it means to reach wider. We're going to have a dialogue about across boundaries, and we're going to be exploring the meaning of what boundaries we need to concern ourselves with as we prepare our students for a global future and as we take on those deep divides, those deep equity realities in higher education. And we are delighted to have with us 5 amazing people to help us think this through. So Jeffrey Brown has bravely volunteered to moderate this. You will know him as the senior correspondent for PBS NewsHour. In a career spanning more than 20 years at PBS NewsHour, he's served in a variety of roles, both on and off camera. As senior correspondent, conducted studio conversations, reported from the field in a wide variety of domestic and international settings, and now regularly serves on the nightly NewsHour as a co-anchor. Prior to joining the NewsHour, he helped produce numerous public television series for media and society seminars, an independent production company that was headed by Fred W. Friendly, has a degree in classics, although that's not on your bio, but I know this, from the University of California, Berkeley, and an MS from the Columbia University Graduate School of Journalism. So welcome and thank you for agreeing to chair this discussion. And he's going to be joined by 4 feisty thinkers and doers, people who have their own ideas about what liberal education has been and should be in a globally connected world. And they are, in alphabetical order, Frank Bruni, whom you will know as an op-ed columnist for the New York Times. I don't know Frank well personally, but it's my impression that he must have set out to prove how many different things you could do at the New York Times with a liberal arts degree, because he has moved from being chief restaurant critic to Sunday Magazine contributor and staff writer, Rome bureau chief, and then has become a well-known and widely read op-ed columnist. Has a book in the making on higher education. We're looking forward to seeing that in the near future. He got his BA from the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, also went to Columbia Graduate School of Journalism, where he was, in fact, second in his class. Brian Murphy is president of the Anza College and also a member of the AAC&U Board of Directors. Prior to going to De Anza, which is a very creative and entrepreneurial, civic-minded 2-year institution in California, he served as executive director of the San Francisco Urban Institute at San Francisco State University, where he also was an associate professor of political science. He's done an amazing amount of public service work, including some work on the California Master Plan, He has a BA from Williams College in political science, master's degrees also in political science from UC Berkeley, and as I've already said, a member of our board of directors. Azar Nafisi is Director of Cultural Conversations at the School of Advanced International Studies at Johns Hopkins University, where she also teaches aesthetics, culture, and literature, and courses on the relation between culture and politics. She's taught at a number of universities, including Oxford, but most famously, I think we have to agree, in Tehran, and she is the author of the best-selling book, Reading Lolita in Tehran, a memoir and books. And most recently, she's published The Republic of the Imagination, America in 3 books, just came out last year, and I recommend it to you strongly if you've not already had a chance to read it. She got her PhD in literature from the University of Oklahoma. And last but certainly not least, my good friend, Kavita Ramdas, who is currently the principal representative of the Ford Foundation in India, Nepal, and Sri Lanka. She's been there for the last 3 years. Prior to that, she was teaching in the program on social entrepreneurship at Stanford. But most significantly for the work that we care about this evening, she was president for some 14 years of the Global Fund for Women, which invested in myriad creative ways in trying to create new opportunity for women around the world seeking opportunity and dignity for themselves. I got to know her when she was a trustee at Mount Holyoke College, from which she's also a graduate, and she has been a longtime advisor to us at AAC&U. So please welcome them all, and let's get started.
Thank you. Thank you, Carol. And first, can everybody hear me okay? Okay, great. Thank you, Carol. Thank you, all members of the association here and fellow panelists. And this is a subject that is near and dear to my heart. I do indeed have that classics degree, although I was just thinking as Carol was saying it, you know how, I don't know if you're like me, but a lot of people have that one nightmare that they wake up with occasionally, once a year or something. It doesn't happen very often. I'm on live television every night. I don't wake up worrying about that. My nightmare is, did I actually finish my degree? I sometimes wake up and think, did I finish that last class? But anyway, I did. Pretty sure I have the degree. And it's in classics, which means that I have a lot of wonderful books on the shelves in Greek and Latin that I'm afraid I can no longer read very well, but I can flaunt the degree at meetings like this. More importantly, and this is what we'll talk a lot about, is it's given me a grounding and a basis in a lot of things. It really opened up my life in many ways. And the most important reason why the subject is so near and dear to me right now is because of the work I do on public television, trying to connect public events, daily events, the news, and look at and present them in a kind of with a grounding, with a context that has some sense of other cultures and some sense of history and some sense of even literature. I get to do that on television. It's wonderful. And all of that aimed at engaging a broad public. It's so crucial to me, and I know to everybody here and all of you. How do we get to sort of do our thing and engage the public at the same time? So we're going to talk about a lot of areas of education here on the panel. There's no ground rules except talk, listen, a conversation here. No opening speeches. Though I thought I kind of came up with and I'm going to see how good a panel you are right off the bat, and whether you indulge me, because I thought of a kind of mildly personal first question. Since I just said about my degree, as a kind of by way of introducing yourself here, I wanted to ask you to tell us an educational experience. You were going to be first, Kavita.
Okay.
That you look back at as a kind of defining moment, or something that shaped you.
I think actually there were 2 defining moments. The first involved dropping out of college, and that was, I was a student at Delhi University.
I did that twice, by the way.
Very good.
But okay, go ahead.
So I was a student at Delhi University, and nice middle-class Indian girls are not supposed to drop out of college. And but I was just really very involved with a band. And, and I just really didn't see the point. It didn't seem to be really that compelling. At which point my father was totally mortified. My mother very wisely said nothing except to say, well, good, you'll have more time on your hands to do lots of interesting things. And one of the things that I became involved with was spending 3 months in a village in Bihar, in one of the poorest states in India, and thinking I was sort of now becoming of the people, for the people, with people, and making kind of a big mess of trying to be a helpful farmer. And an older gentleman in the village, in the house that I was living in, said to me, you know, you're not very good at sorting wheat from chaff, or whatever the thing is that the women do with the... And I was dropping most of it. And he said, you know, almost everybody in our village would give their right arm to have the kind of opportunities that you take for granted. And why is it that you don't feel that you can use your education to actually do something for us? Because what you're doing here is not actually that helpful. So that was one. And it was sort of this moment in which I thought, oh, well, maybe I should finish my degree. And the second was meeting the Dean of International Students at Mount Holyoke, who happened to be visiting India, as Mount Holyoke does on a regular basis, and said to me, you know, have you ever thought about applying to school in the United States? And that was 1983, and I didn't think that was something possible to do. And I said, well, I don't really want to do 4 more years of college. I've already done 2. And she said, well, we could accept your experience working this year, but you do have to go back and finish your second-year exams and then apply. So I think those were both very transformational experiences for me.
Frank?
Well, first I have to say I've been sitting here in a little bit of confusion because...
Already?
Yeah, already. Because when they were making references, and I have to go to my doctor, I think, next week and have my hearing checked, because when they were making references to your major, I kept hearing plastics.
Oh.
And I thought I was in some sequel to The Graduate or something. I didn't know what was going on. All that, I'm not kidding. All that comes to mind, the minute you said kind of transformative education, whatever you said is, as you mentioned, I went to University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. They had what I believe to be, and I hope it still is, a very strong English department. And whenever I just think of the wonders and the excitement of education, there was a professor in that department. I've not kept in touch with her. I don't know if she's still there. Her name was Ann Hall, and she was miraculous. And I just remember taking every class I could with her because she would stand there in the front of the room. I remember in particular a class on Shakespeare's tragedies, and she would talk about and recite lines from King Lear in a way that made it impossible for you not to just love the play, but to feel like everything you needed to know about life was right there. And we talk a lot these days, and I assume we'll talk a lot tonight, about education that's relevant and what kind of education prepares people for the world. And I don't think there's any preparation better than being witness to and an audience for someone enthralled to ideas and language and literature like that.
That's wonderful.
Azhar?
I'm afraid I liked what you said.
That's good.
That is good. Well, I was thinking, like Kavita, of two experiences. None of them have anything to do with my formal education. One was when I was very, very young. My father would tell me stories. I think as soon as I came into consciousness of who I am, he would start telling me stories at night. And he would start with the Persian mythology and the Persian stories, and then he would bring the whole world into my life. The next day we would go to France with Little Prince. The next day we would go to Italy with Pinocchio. We would go to Denmark with Hans Christian Andersen. So from that very early childhood, I realized that I could have the world in that little room. You know, that world of imagination, I did not need to leave the room, but I could, in fact, go around the whole world, and the world was my home. And I think that was something that I never lost. The idea that there was this other space where we all would transcend the boundaries of nationality and gender and class and race and ethnicity and religion, and we all will have some space in common. That was my first experience. But, you know, it was just pure and adulterated joy, you know, that sort of a thing. But later on I heard that the pain, I realized the pain that it would bring with it. And that was when, as a student, I finished, when I finished my studies in 1979, I was 2 days after I finished my oral defense of my dissertation, I was on my way to Iran. And my timing is terrible. I went to Iran in 1979, when I confronted fundamentalism, terror, and the war with Iraq. And I came back to United States in 1997, fundamentalism, terror, and the war with Iraq. So you shouldn't go where I go. But anyway, when I went back to Iran this time, to the place I called home, I realized all those things that I called home were not home anymore. That I didn't understand the way that the new hierarchy, you know, ruling elite was defining my country and my place. But one thing that I also realized was things that I had taken most for granted, because in US I was very involved in the student movement. I was against everything, you know. It was rather fun, rather self-righteous. You know, US advisors, CIA agents, get out of Iran. And they all got out of Iran, you know. And here we were faced with ourselves. And I realized everything that I had thought was just part of me and was not subversive was the most subversive thing. I realized that Great Gatsby and Shahrazad's 1001 Nights, and Nizami and Maulana and W.H. Auden, these were the subversive people to a dictatorial mindset. And that just what tyranny targets is individual rights, you being yourself, being a woman, being a teacher, being a writer, being a reader. And that was one of the most painful and lasting lessons I learned. And I don't think that I'll ever want to lose that one lesson. And that Pinocchio and Little Prince were really very, very subversive. And that we should look at them again and question not just the world, but ourselves, pose ourselves as a question mark.
And Brian, can you top that?
He tops everything.
I was carried away there for a moment. No, I was thinking about Bertie the pig. Bertie the pig was a childhood hero of mine. It was in a children's story, and he organizes a raid on the farmer's pantry because the badly treated farm animals have reached a point of annoyance. And Bertie's motto was deeds, not grunts. So I have this very vivid memory, in 1965, a group of us, I'm thinking of self-righteousness, a group of us at Williams College and Bennington College organized a march against the war in Vietnam from Bennington to Williams through the farmlands of southern Vermont to organize the working people of southern Vermont.
Boy, there's a theme emerging here, isn't there? I didn't expect this at all.
And I remember my dear friend pointing out to me that we were not getting an enthusiastic response. In any event, and for some reason I thought of Bertie, and I said, you know, deeds, not grunts. And I talk about this, and we got to the campus, and I was a scholarship boy at Williams when diversity consisted of two guys from California, right? And my professor, I was just talking with John Chandler from Williams about the phenomenal Bob Gaudino, this philosophy professor, and for some reason I saw him, and I remember I saw him and I said, "We've just come off the march," and I remember he taught classical philosophy, but he looked at me and he said, "So, Mr. Murphy, how's the United Front?" I don't know why that came up. It was a very sobering moment when I realized that there was a gap between my theory and my practice. My entire life has been an effort.
Well, look, this turned out to be a more interesting question than I thought. Actually, if you've got the right panel, I'm going to remember this, but I need the right panel. But in your answers was the beginnings of, because I like to define subjects before we kind of unspool them a bit. And I think in those answers was the beginning of an answer to defining a good education, a liberal education. I think somewhere in there there were farm animals as well. But let's just. Can anybody take a stab? Frank, you looked first.
Frank was good for that.
We'll just start. Take
You're
a
gonna be
stab at
stabbed.
how do you define a good education today? What should young students be getting in college?
I mean, to speak in generalities and also to kind of reference the title of this panel or whatever, I mean, I think a good education is one that undercuts all your assumptions, that challenges them all. I think it's one that insists that you expand your horizons and bust out of your comfort zone and your box. One of the things that really concerns me about the way we talk about college today when kids are on the path to college, about the way we talk about college admissions, and about the kind of campus we set up for kids, is we do something that's way too much a mirror of what happens online, where you have your social medias and your bookmarks set up so that you live in a world of constant echo and affirmation.
Yeah.
When you mentioned a book that I have coming out shortly, and when I was doing it and looking a lot at the way colleges market themselves to kids, they market themselves as places where you'll find exactly what's going to make you most comfortable. You'll find exactly your kind. You'll find exactly the thing you want to do. I think college and a good education should be the opposite of that. I think it should be something that insists for that spell of life, until you have things like mortgages to worry about, that you experiment, that you take chances, that you set yourself up to fail, because and my microphone's slipping, it's the one, this is all falling down.
That happened to me too.
Anyway, I think that's my cue to stop.
Well, Brian, I mean, do you find young people coming wanting to be shaken out of their comfort zone, or the opposite?
I think that this is a theme that's gone through today's conversations, and I was seeing the hands that went up of those of you who were not here during the day, and so you wouldn't have known what the conversation was during the day. But a theme that kept sort of emerging and then receding, emerging and receding, is the enormous difference between our institutions. So that the difference between a 23,000 student, 2-year public community college, whose students are immigrant, working class, first generation, and the northeastern colleges that create very often the model that I think Frank is explicitly referring to, the kind of echo chamber of class. And students who come to our campus are very, very different from that. And they are coming out of a wide variety of experiences with a wide variety of ages and many of them, vast majority of them, working. And the vast majority of American undergraduates are in institutions like that. They're either in community colleges, they're in 4-year public comprehensive universities. And those students have often gone or come to institutions for very conventional reasons on the surface. It's the way you get ahead. I'm looking for work. But underneath it are a set of much deeper, complicated motives and intentions. And among them is this deep need for connection, the deep need to feel a sense of agency, that you matter in the world. And to be in an institution that affirms your capacity for agency without reaffirming the presumptions with which you start. So for middle-class students who come to De Anza, they're confronting the world on the campus. You know, it's your point, Kavita, this morning. You don't have to go around the world. It's like right in your class next to you are men and women from enormously varied backgrounds. Working class kids or immigrant kids who come to the school making the decision that they're coming to the college. There's no truancy rule and nobody's making you come. You're getting up in the morning and already demonstrating this capacity to change your life in some kind of way.
But can I jump in here though? Then how do you define an education for them the same way? You're talking about differences in our education system. Do we define what is a good education differently?
It's almost more important to know who the we are who's defining it. But to the degree to which the issue of class is underneath what we're talking about, the way we describe the purposes of a liberal education is that students gain the capacity of agency to change the world, not only or uniquely their personal circumstances. That in the case of poorer and immigrant students, it's not sensible to talk about the way this will transform your life independent of the way it will also perhaps make a difference in your community, your neighborhood.
Kavita, you've seen this from an international perspective.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. This morning I was saying, I think one of the things that has been very humbling about moving, and like Azhar, I don't feel like I can say any more moving back to India. I feel like I've moved forward to India or something, is recognizing that in a society where 90% of the working population works in the informal sector, where there are huge increases in enrollment, but where the most recent report, which is sort of the best known report on the state of education in India, essentially presents that we have made no significant progress in actually educating children in our schools. So this is not even higher education. So many of these young people are not even prepared to go into the higher education institutions that we have. And then the institutions of higher education that exist in India was so clearly created for a class, as Brian was mentioning, that was already privileged by the first under colonialism because we all spoke English. And for me, I think the single most defining difference around sort of who is privileged and not privileged in India is who speaks English and who doesn't. And it's literally, I mean, on top of an existing caste system, there is this other class system, and there is a class system around who speaks English. So I think, I mean, when I think about what a good education in today's world should begin with, I think at the very least it has to begin with an acknowledgement that the world that we live in, all of us live in, actually, is shaped by such profound inequality and such profoundly different sets of possibilities because of that huge inequality, that it's not even a question of level playing field. It's like, forget about levels, there are mountains and ravines. I mean, and I think that is something for me which I feel like whether you're in a very privileged institution, whether you're in the Williams or Mount Holyoke's of the world, or whether you are in a public community college, or whether you are in a huge university in Sao Paulo or in New Delhi, there has to be some ability for that institution of education to convey to students that we live in a world with these huge, huge inequalities, and that therefore part of their engagement with an education has to be to figure out what we're going to do about it, no matter on which point of that privilege or lack of you sit. That's what I think a good education today should do.
Well, so, Azhar, why isn't that happening? I mean, your new book, part of it is an argument about why that isn't happening in the United States, the lack of a connection to our literature, to our history, to our education.
Well, part of it, I think, is that in order to connect to the world, you have to have an understanding of yourself.
Yeah.
And where you stand and what your values and principles are, to know yourself in order to know the world. And I think that we are living right now in a crisis which is not simply economic or political, but it is a crisis of vision. And that is why education is so central. Now, I would say one thing as a recent immigrant. The fact that immigrants, and I bring you an example of myself who come from Iran, from a family who, for whom the only way they were snobbish was about who reads books. It wasn't money and wealth, it wasn't position in society, but it was culture. That was what mattered. And I talk about someone else who is this guy who's in construction, who comes from Guatemala, whose name is Ronaldo, who doesn't speak my language, who doesn't come from the same background as I do. But what we both have in common is the fact that we brought our children to this country in order for them to be able to fulfill themselves as individuals. And for me and for Ronaldo, who was smiling, all over the place when he done this thing. Somebody doesn't want me to talk.
Welcome to my world.
Yeah, it is welcome to your world. I like to sort of be in your world. But what I was trying to say was that Ronaldo, one of the things that linked me to me was one morning he comes to me and he says, Miss Azar, my daughter was accepted to Rutgers in order to study journalism, and she wants to be a writer. Now, no matter where in the world you come from, you come to a democratic society not to fill your pockets necessarily, but in order to be able to fulfill the dream. Mm-hmm. So how I feel about a democratic society is that it is built on an idea. And when I think of democracy, I think of the fact that what belonged once to a few now can belong to all citizens, because we all have the right to life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. So for individuals who have the right to life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness, those things that belonged to the aristocracy, like art, like literature, like philosophy, ideas, now become public. And therefore, every citizen in a democracy has the right to great public education. That is what my view as an immigrant coming to a country like this is, that it is my right. I'm not, darn it, this thing is on Hannity's side, not mine. Okay, now the whole point here that I'm trying to make is that for me, it is just not digestible that we have public schools that are cutting art and literature and music and access to books, and we're more and more depending upon private schools to create a different kind of a class, one that this country was fighting against. So this is really problematic for me. And no matter what I do, no matter how much I love Nabokov and Kafka, I am committed to propagate a great public education, which is what is missing from here. And the second thing that
Azhar,
I would say...
Can I ask you something? One of the things I have found very interesting in a totally different place like India is that, ironically, the institutions that are supposed to be public, that are supposed to deliver for the people who wouldn't otherwise have the access. So as you said, it's a democracy. It also is striving to, create this kind of access. But in fact, what is happening is that public institutions, because they are failing to deliver that, poor people are spending their last pennies, or rupees in this case, to send their children to private institutions because they believe that at least over there the teacher will show up. Their children will have some access to an education. And it is actually becoming a real crisis in the sense that it's a different kind of crisis than what is happening in the United States, but not that different in some ways. Because I think the whole conversation we've been having here about public education is that if it fails to do what you just said, then is it actually being democratic, or is it simply ensuring that a group of people who have been denied that opportunity continue to be denied the opportunity to even aspire to going to anything else? I mean, will they even have a chance to get into the other more elite institutions if they don't even get a basic education in their public school?
No, you're right. And the whole point about our colleges, and I remember a column I read by Frank, in fact, about the fact that, ideas and imagination are dangerous. They're subversive. They change not the world, because they first have to change us before they change the world. So they're basically questioning us. And I remember reading about this, what you were writing about the fact that there's a fight going on here between me and the voice. All right. Now, what I'm trying to say is that the way I see the danger I see to education today is, one, the whole issue of poverty, and the fact that we are not, as a society, taking the responsibility to provide our children with the right to life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. Because in a democratic society, you are responsible for what happens in the society, which means you need to have knowledge, which means that knowledge is power, which means that those aristocrats who lived before American Revolution, they had power through, in fact, knowledge. That Da Vinci and Dante and Saint Augustine, all of them belonged to the people who had power, and now people should have power.
Oh, but let me ask you, while you fix that, let me ask you something. Whether you're in India, or a poor person in India, or coming to De Anza, it's impossible to ignore the cost-benefit analysis, I would think, of education. Go ahead.
All of us who last night, is this working? I have a sort of global anxiety here. All of us who last night watched the president speak, there was this moment for any of us in California that was a little odd, because he was proposing a revolutionary idea that the first 2 years of college would be free. I was thinking to myself, where's Clark Kerr when we need him? In California in 1960, the state made a declaration of commitment that all of education through the bachelor's degree was essentially free. Community colleges, the CSU, and the University of California. And that commitment was rooted in two very serious insights. One is exactly the insight you are mentioning, which is a productive and democratic society, in this case a state, is going to depend upon educated people. And it's worth it to the tax system to tax the others sufficient that the others get it for free. In old-fashioned terms, it was a pretty straightforward class compromise. And the second is it brought at least the view of the possibility of social peace, because it said to both rich and poor, you have an opportunity to go to the education. What it left open was the question of the content of that education. And three very different systems with enormously different campuses defined it very differently. Mm-hmm. But in some ways, and Frank's definition actually is really very resonant with what happens in a pre-vocational view of higher education, which is it is the confrontation with difference and otherness, and in the end, that's a confrontation with yourself. It's a way of exploring your identity, not just your career. And those some sort of romantic ideas. The notion was it's worth it to the state to pay for it, because all of us together will benefit from it in ways that are not uniquely economic, that they are profoundly social. And particularly in a state of immigrants, in a country now by 2042, we will be majority non-white, in which the vast majority of students coming through the educational system will not be white. We had best then have an education that prepares us to build a community of mutual respect, of some way of talking past or with or in our differences. All of those things are in the catalogs, the mission statements, of the most elite institutions and the most broad access institutions. So the question is, can we recommit? In effect, I'm making two arguments, if you will, simultaneously. The first is the sort of political economics of it, which is public policy that would do that. And second is the internal transformative education that would lead students to then be able to act politically to create that politics.
Well, but before we go that big, Frank, how much do you think costs, just to put it bluntly, costs of education dictate perceptions of what college should be for today? How much is that driving this conversation?
Enormously. There are a lot of people. Is this working now? I'm having you. Yeah.
No, it's a terrible anxiety.
I have everybody's anxiety. It's like a virus. Yeah. Enormously, obviously. I mean, not at the upper end of the scale. I mean, you've got, when you're talking about people from families who make more than $500,000 a year, or actually I should even put the number higher when we're talking about what education costs. People aren't doing the cost-benefit analysis that's being done in other families, but when education costs a certain amount, you can't help but say, well, what am I getting for it? What am I going into? What's my job going to be?
Right.
This is falling too. Sorry.
You want this, Frank?
Yeah, I'll take this. Yeah. You can't help but do that. And the system is sort of crazy because, as you all know a lot better than I do, because you work at schools, if you're low enough on the income chain, actually school is cheaper than if you're caught in that sort of dreadful middle where you don't qualify for. And we have to address that because that's kind of perverse. Not because we're doing too much for people at the bottom, but because we're not really kind of looking at the whole scheme and what it means. I just wanted to say something. You were talking about income inequality. You've been talking a little bit about public stuff. I think that one of the kind of sisters of inequality in our world today, and I alluded to it before, is this sort of relentless sorting that goes on. Yeah. And I think one of the really big challenges for higher education and for the way we steer kids into different schools is to try to push back at the sorting that's happening in our country before college and after college. But
by sorting you mean?
Sorting by interest, sorting by political philosophy, sorting by class.
Driven by individuals, by
I think it's
parents?
I think it's driven by everything. It's driven by the emerging structures of the country. It's this sort of kind of habit that's developing across all sectors. I got this email a month ago from Delta introducing some new planes they were developing that had 5 classes of service. And I really kind of looked at it several times thinking it was something from The Onion or something. There was literally, and it spelled it out. It was 5 different classes of service. Mm-hmm. And I thought, that's America in a nutshell. And I think it has infected higher education, but I think higher education is also an arena that has the kind of power and ability to push back at it in a way that lower levels of education really can't.
So could I say something about that? Because I think when you're looking again at
you're secure. Okay.
Yeah, I'm very secure. Thank you.
We're very good at this end here.
Yeah.
Blessed.
We're well behaved.
Yeah. No. I guess what this makes me think of, this issue about sorting, though, is it's complicated because it's very deeply connected to the changes in our global economic system. And what I mean by that is that I find it actually a bit traumatizing that we've now, I've been reading the materials of this conference, and it's like college is an imperative. We must all go to college because for the world of tomorrow, we must all go to college. And yet I'm living now for the last 2.5 years in a country where literally you cannot, in a country that built the Taj Mahal, for crying out loud, you cannot get a decent plumber or a decent electrician or a decent any kind of craftsperson. This in a place which literally, if you go to the Taj Mahal, there's no problem with drainage in the Taj Mahal. There are like perfectly built, exactly sized drainage holes that were built 500 years ago by the same people. They didn't import Iranians to come do it. Well, maybe. I don't know. I don't think so. Right? But I raise this because I do actually worry that part of what is driving this whole thing about, everybody must go to college and therefore there shouldn't be sorting. And I agree that there shouldn't be sorting on the basis of God knows, I come from a country in which there's a caste system. You're sorted before you're even born. And then your last name sorts you for the rest of your life. But I do think that there is a danger in having privileged this kind of Brahminical education, if you let me use the caste system analysis, in which everybody must be a scholar and read books.
Okay, so you're suggesting that not everybody should be encouraged to go to college?
Well, the problem with it is because we now have a situation, unlike the America which I came to in 1983, where I worked on buildings and grounds for 2 years and was amazed by the fact that people who did buildings and grounds work could afford a decent life, could afford to send their kids to good schools, were proud of the work that they did, and actually had, quote unquote, a middle class kind of a life. And that was true for people who worked in factories, and that was true for people who were plumbers and electricians, and that is not a world that our current economic system necessarily supports. So, maybe in Germany, if you are a skilled plumber, you can actually have still a decent job. But not in lots of other places. And so I'm not against the intent of what you're saying, but I guess I am worried about a world in which we feel that there is only one choice, and that one choice is to go to college, because otherwise you'll be stuck in all these terrible jobs which, are
Give Frank
no
the
good.
microphone.
Frank,
Please.
take the microphone.
No, that's not what I'm saying. I mean, the problem,
and
the problem I have with what you're saying is to which children are you going to say college is not a good idea for you? I mean, I agree with you wholeheartedly that we need to lose the attitude that there are professions that don't require a college degree that are less honorable. And your information is a little wrong, because actually you can make a fantastic living in this country as a plumber. My uncle's a plumber, and he's doing real well.
Right. More than as art history major,
you're absolutely right that we need to lose the snobbery, and we need not to tell kids that if they don't go to college and get a college degree, they're failures. The problem is, how do we do that and talk about that in a way, which population of kids are you saying that to? You've got to be really careful. That's all I'm saying.
Right, absolutely.
Yes.
Go ahead.
Well, and I also think that's why civic education is so important, because a plumber still has to vote, has to make a choice,
yes.
And therefore he needs
Yes.
to be able to use that mechanism, especially I was thinking of a fantastic Iranian cleric who's in opposition to the present regime. And during the recent crisis and upheavals, what he was saying was that we have to stop saying that this is a world between the West and the rest, the West and Islam. We all live in modernism. And that everything that is good or bad, including fundamentalism, including Islamic fundamentalism, comes from this modern world. That is why we keep coming back to America, because America is so responsible for creating this new world. And now what I'm saying is that a plumber, whether he lives in India or in Iran or in United States, has to know his rights as a citizen. And so we need to have a sort of general education where every citizen can think for his own. My husband and my son are both civil engineers, and they are both in love with Great Gatsby and Carson McCullers' Heart is a Lonely Hunter. We have segregated science and technology from humanities. We have forgotten that the first great works of humanity in terms of ideas and imagination came from the public. We have forgotten Aeschylus and Sophocles, we have forgotten Mahabharata, we have forgotten Ferdowsi, we have forgotten Shakespeare, we have forgotten the fact that Dickens and Jane Austen did not come out of elite colleges. You know, and therefore the public, including plumbers, really deserve much better than what they're getting. That was one point. And I just make
but before you do that one, let Brian. Brian.
Okay, I'll remember that.
Yeah, you
cut
remember
me
your
off.
second point.
Okay.
But on that point, I mean, how do you spread the values of that education throughout the culture to all the different? I mean, you must run into this all the time with students.
And which kids
Is
do
it
it
smarter
there, as you said?
to work to be a plumber? If I'm coming to your college, should I take the class in Aeschylus or should I take the civil engineering class? No, I'm asking Brian.
Okay.
Take both, bloody
We're good.
hell.
I should say.
You know what I'm saying?
Can I say Azar and I are good friends, so I'm allowed to talk to her that way? I don't want to come off like a. Yeah.
I think
Shut up over there, Brian. Go ahead.
The students don't come to us context-free, right?
Right.
They come from their own particular circumstances, but they also come from the relentless cultural drumbeat that Frank's referring to. And in higher education, that has been an endless vocationalism that infects, if you will, every student that comes to every college, from the most elite to the least elite. And so there is a kind of basic get a job, get a career, this is for that kind of functionalism, which is built into high schools and popular culture that's pretty relentless. And I think it's a dominant discourse in the country. It's a dominant discourse, unfortunately, from our political leadership. And yet, students, when they get to an actual college of whatever dimension, and for the first time, in the first class, are engaged in a book, a play, a piece of music that they've never heard before, something else magical happens. Yes. It just does. And it happens for the least prepared student in the way it happens for the best prepared student. And so for those of us who are working with students who come in, 85% of the students at our institution test below college level mathematics and English compositional skills, right? So a way of thinking about them, and some of you have heard me say this, is to work only through their deficits and to say, you know, poor things, we need to fill whatever these gaps are. 75% of those same students are bilingual, fully fluent in 2 languages, who do code shifting every minute of every day they walk in the world, who manage to navigate complex bureaucracies and the private indignities of race all the time, and to have them read a piece of literature that opens that up to them and that shows them that their experience is a common human experience is a profoundly powerful thing. But at a certain point, we have to call out with them, not for them, with them, what's the purpose of this thing? What are we doing this for? What do you think we're doing it for? What do you think you're doing it for? That question of what this is for opens up a whole host of incredibly powerful insights. And I think it doesn't diminish, if you will, their need to get a job. There's not a single student at our college who's confused at all about the fact they need work. But the question is, then what? Or and what? Those deeper questions really are, I think, very profoundly affected by the content, Carol, of what a liberal education is about. To just not ever treat a student as if there were, because there just isn't, a kind of neat unilinear connection between the vocational intention. I've got a 3-week certificate course that'll get you a gig. And then there's the rest of your life. Students see through that in a heartbeat.
Frank?
I just wanted to say, too, is this working?
You need your mic.
I just want to say two things about that. It occurs to me as you were talking about vocationalism and all that, if we've seen nothing else in the last 10 or 20 years in this country, we've seen that we cannot predict what the economy is going to look like 10 years from now. I mean, the pace of change in this world is so brisk that I would say there's a better argument right now than ever before in saying accurately to kids who are going into higher education or kids at any level of education, do not prepare yourself too narrowly for one thing, because we have no idea how valuable that thing will be 10 years down the road.
Yeah.
So what I think we have a better argument and motivation than ever for educating kids to be intellectually nimble, to be curious, to be good at acquiring information and processing it, because we don't know what exactly, what exact set of knowledge or skills they're going to need. We just know that they're going to need to be intellectually nimble. Also, when you describe your school, I smile inside, because a lot of schools at the very summit of reputation talk about diversity and have nothing in the realm of diversity like what you have there. And I think as we talk to kids about where they're going to go to school, and as we fill them with these competitive instincts and all this, and we talk about what about the school experience is going to prepare them for the world, we need to really talk to them about what diversity is and how much public universities, community colleges, et cetera, offer them in terms of a glimpse of the world as it really is, as opposed to the ivory tower. That's all.
Very good. Frank, I just wanted to add that I think there is, I was not actually, the argument I was making is that in places like India, if you are a plumber, you actually can't get the kind of job that a plumber can get in the United States, even today. And while I do think that the destruction of unions, for example, and the fact that there are fewer and fewer opportunities in, say, the manufacturing field than there were. So yes, if you're in the skilled trades, you can still have a decent paying job. That is not true for lots of other kinds of jobs. And that is why we have so many people in the kinds of low-wage jobs in the United States working often 2 and 3 jobs to be able to make the same amount of money that you would have made for a different kind of job 15 years ago or 20 years ago. And I think that is a huge question for those countries in the world where there are 500 million young people waiting to have both, and they're also, as Brian just mentioned, completely clear that they do need a job. And I think this whole sort of romanticism about, micro enterprise and how poor people are so entrepreneurial and they're, being able to transform their lives with a $50 loan is just bullshit. I mean, I'm really sorry, but it is. It is because you have a society in which poor people are not able to get a decent education, and then they are not able to enter the labor force with any kind of material skills that enable them to participate. And most importantly, that despite living in a democracy where actually the reason that people always are surprised that, in India you have 65% or more voting participation as opposed to the United States is because that is the one time as a poor person in India that you count because your numbers matter. And that is where democracy by the ballot actually is so much more profound in the context of a democracy like that, as opposed to a democracy like this one, where, the civic education often means that the poor are the least likely to vote in this country. In India, it's exactly the opposite way around. So,
a lot of our critique here has been at big forces, cultural or governments. For our rest of our time and for this audience, let's focus in on the academy itself, the colleges and universities, to the extent they're part of the problem here, right? The sorting, every problem we've talked about. Where are they falling short, and what do you want to see happen to emphasize the kind of education we're talking about? I mean, the issues, emphasizing more teaching, over-specialization, not engage, where I started this conversation, not engaging public issues enough. That's what I see a lot with our universities at all levels. Go ahead.
Well, I see two enemies,
both
within the academia and without. One is this sort of dominant utilitarian mindset. I see the problem in this attitude and mindset, and then what you were mentioning, I think, are results of this attitude. They're symptoms of this attitude, which is now, and actually I'm so surprised that our president keeps focusing on it, on the idea that you go to college in order to make money to get a vocation. Now, you go to college because in a democratic society, you feel that you need to get a vocation, and all sorts of vocation, including an art historian, for example. So being a librarian, being a teacher, being an art historian, being a writer, being a reader, being a bookseller, being a librarian, the society should provide you, should you have the passion for it, to be involved in all these vocations, and also being a plumber or being a civil engineer. That is the first thing. So this vocation, without the context, without the fact that human beings, apart from bread and apart from vocation, are prepared to give their lives for ideas, for meaning, for passion. And therefore, no matter what kind of vocation we have to choose the fields in college that suit us best, that fulfill us most. That is that utilitarian idea that has nothing to do with American pragmatism.
But do you see that in the universities?
I see that in the universities as well, and I see the fact that what Frederick Douglass very simply put, which is you need your hands and your mind. Mm-hmm. You need both of them, which to me is a symbol of American pragmatism, that you need that universality of ideas. You need imagination. You need to go where no one has trod before and sort of make it functional in the world, make it part of your vocation in life. That is missing. The second thing, which I was horrified when I came back to the United States after 18 years of being in Iran, was the way that the colleges were infected by ideology. The fact that there was a form of, now we call it political correctness or whatever, which sort of went hand in hand with this idea of utilitarianism. Namely, you don't go to university in order to gain knowledge. You go there because you reduce literature, philosophy, any other field, science, into sort of a small ideological space. And, that is the problem that we're facing today. Intolerance of people who are different from us, who are opposed to us, who don't talk the way we do. And I can bring hundreds of examples from Frank's column, in fact, in terms of this intolerance that I see in universities and the way that we make the students not face and confront the obstacles in the world. And that brings me, and I'll shut up and promise not to talk at all from here on, because I want Kavita to talk, actually. Because she mentioned something in her article about how we use the words global. We use certain words without really knowing the meaning of it. Now, coming where I'm coming from, and I don't know, Kavita, maybe where you come from, a tyranny really teaches you things very quickly. When I went back to Iran, I realized that they targeted what went under the name of individual rights and human rights. So their targets specifically were women, minorities, and culture. And their targets were universities. They weren't targeting science and mathematics, in which they're very good. They were targeting humanities. They were targeting where ideas come from, they were targeting where imagination comes from, and they were redefining culture and history in their own words in order to capture the minds and impose on all the citizens one voice. So for me, it was very easy to see that my right as a woman was related to my right as a teacher, as a reader, and as a writer. In here, it's very different. Because in here, they sort of feed you with indifference. So even someone like Malala, Malala, the young girl who was ready to die in order to read the books that our children read freely. As soon as she reaches England, she becomes a celebrity. As soon as she reaches England, she's taken on a stage. And our children and our grown-ups all wow her. We take out that dangerous element out of her. And our children in college who wow Malala are not prepared to face violence and oppression in fiction. So Merchant of Venice, Huckleberry Finn, Great Gatsby, some of the greatest classics of the world are banned in some of our best universities because our children will be traumatized. How can these students who reading Huckleberry Finn will be traumatized be facing and confront a world where ISIS is beheading people every day on stage? So I'm sort of putting a question to you. The land of pioneers, the land of people who came and started something out of nothing, and now we have to pander to our students' comfort and take out texts because it will traumatize them. This means that our children have forgotten the lines between reality and fiction. Because the only thing that is sacred in the academy is the ability to bring out the profane, to be able to talk about everything, to be able to discuss everything. That is how we prepare our children for the world. So I'm sorry I got very excited. But this is what has been
Azhar,
bothering me.
Yeah.
And Kavita, you tell me. Yeah. I have been reading everything on Charlie Hebdo, from both sides, right and left. I tell you, the way these people discuss what goes on under the name Islam is so disgusting that I can't even write an article to refuse it. It is so much based on ignorance. So much based on ignorance of what this country is all about, that these countries each have a name. They're not just Muslim world. That they are Turkey, Iran, Indonesia, Afghanistan, Saudi Arabia, coming from different histories and different places.
Azhar, I just finished reading Reza Aslan's wonderful book, No God But God. And I strongly recommend it to those of you, and maybe it should be reading in your college courses. It should be in whatever your entry freshman should be reading it. I mean, I was thinking about this question about like what would you really want in the institution? And I think I agree very much with Frank that it should make you, this should be a place that makes you uncomfortable. And of course, Brian, in your kinds of institution, there are things that happen just, as we would say in the ittafaq say, which is just like by happenstance, that make people uncomfortable because, as Frank mentioned, they are coming into contact much more in that reality of the Anza College than they would in any other elite institution with the kinds of global and local playing out in front of them. But I also think it does require some amount of courage from institutions to stand up to both this notion of what is politically correct and your point about this level of comfort that the whole thing, I mean, I have been to so many universities now with a 21-year-old in college who are saying, this is how much we spent on the gym, and this is how much we spent on upgrading the rooms, and this is how much we spent on, whatever it is, so your child will not feel like and they have like a laundry service. I mean, like, really? You can't do laundry in your own dorms? You don't know how to do laundry? I mean, I came from India. I'd never seen a laundry machine in my life. I didn't know what a washing machine was. I pretty quickly figured out how you put 2 quarters into a machine and, No, I'm actually, this is actually really problematic about the elite institutions on the one hand. And it is far worse. And on the other side of it, I think the this driving, and the elite institutions are no less driven by this vocational, you must get a job, you must get a job. I mean, I watch what is happening, and, this morning somebody said, get a job, any job, it doesn't matter. And I thought to myself, we have become such a classist society. It's just not true that somebody who's a banker in JP Morgan would say to his daughter, it's okay, darling, get a job at McDonald's, that'll be lovely. We would really encourage. It just doesn't happen. They're like, go to Nicaragua and save the children. And then that'll be written in your resume in the next year. And in the next year after that, you'll do, So I just think we have to also be honest about what has happened with this huge divide.
Brian.
I am tempted to explore, and so therefore I will announce that you and I will talk after the panel about whose ideology is dominant where. I do think that there is a deep ideological frame with which we all grapple, and it was expressed last night by the President of the United States, and it was expressed on this stage earlier, and it has a kind of imperial presumption to it that we are unique among the nations, that we are the greatest of all, the Swedes and the Finns and the Norwegians and the Sri Lankans and people from the Maldives may think otherwise for a variety of reasons.
But they're wrong, obviously.
But one of the things that the point being is that all of our students in all of our institutions have been raised relentlessly in this astonishing narcissism of a culture that truly believes it is unique in the history of the world and without peer and without equal. And it strikes me that that frame is really quite welcoming of vocationalism, of the notion that you find your place within it because it is uniquely good, and then that is a life. And it strikes me that there are 2 or 3 contradictions that all of our students face in their adult lives, more than we face them, or at least differently than we face them. And they are all global, and they are structural, and they are not solvable by the market. Global warming, persistent, deep, structural inequality, violence that comes from that inequality. You could name 3 or 4 others. In this country, you'd add housing, infrastructure, healthcare, right? Problems in the world that will define the lives of our students, whatever vocation they have and whatever career they take. Are we preparing them to grapple with those issues in a multipolar world in which we are no longer the center? Are we really doing that? And it strikes me that those of us who care about something called civic education, we are not talking about civics. We're talking about preparing students to talk about, think about, be able to organize with others who are not like them around power, to honestly talk about that. And there is, I think, we share, and I'm saying this self-consciously as a president of an institution, many of us share a profound fear about talking about that because, boy, we're going to piss somebody off. And trustees, donors, whomever. And I think a lot of us in the academy have benefited enormously from our isolation from those issues, thinking that we are ourselves privileged around it. But I think our students' lives are going to demand that we begin thinking about what form of education prepares them to live in this multipolar, complex world in which they're going to have to participate. I'll finally end with a marvelous phrase. Robert Dahl, who was a political scientist, had this marvelous thing. It was called functional apathy. It's the kind of thing Roald Dahl could perhaps have come up with, right? But Robert Dahl did it in his notion. A mature democracy doesn't really need voting and participation if the elites run things marginally well. You're better off without the populist impulse because it can so badly be misled and quickly lead to bad things. Now, half of that's, of course, quite right. But his notion was that, therefore, we ought not prepare or worry too much about those who don't know about the big issues, that they shouldn't participate. And I think as we democratize education, part of what we must be doing as we talk about imagination, culture, language, all of the things that would open up the world to our students, is at the same time talk about what are the leverages of power in that world, and how are they going to be able to think about it and work with others who aren't like them with it. And if we don't do that, I think that we're really profoundly missing a responsibility that we've got.
How do we, sorry, go ahead. No, I was just going to ask, how do we deal, I mean, the other thing that I find worrying at this moment of time, and I don't know how exactly institutions of higher education should deal with it, and I'm curious, Frank, in your research, what you found, is I'm really troubled by the fact that just exactly at the moment when we're saying we're all one world and, you know, we're all connected and we're all aspiring to the same things, it's exactly the same moment when people are retreating almost into these notions of peculiar identities, smaller and smaller, what Tagore would call narrow domestic walls, you know. We are retreating into I'm a Hindu, I'm a Turk, I'm a,
Well, it's also part of the paradox of the internet, too, isn't
Yes.
it, that you see, right?
Yes, exactly.
Well, Frank, go ahead. Respond
I'm
to that.
curious- I'm
in terms
curious.
of prescriptions for the, I'd like to state the
Yeah.
prescriptions for the colleges and
Yeah.
universities to address this kind of thing.
Well, I mean, part of the problem, I wanted to take up something you said before, is we want to talk about what would be the ideal sort of higher education to push back at this stuff, and that's in conflict with the marketplace.
That's
So, I mean, we have, when we're talking about
That's right.
elite universities, when we're talking about, and not just, I mean, elite broadly defined, the best, the conventionally judged best public universities, best private universities, they're all chasing, I mean, I'll use the word ranking as a shorthand, they're all chasing supremacy in the world of optics and reputation.
Yep.
And to get there, they have to be so attractive to students that they get the students with the highest SAT scores, with the highest class ranks. You mentioned the gyms, et cetera. A lot of the chase to be the universities and the small private colleges at the top of the heap as things are ranked, a lot of the things that get you there are antithetical to what you would design to be the kind of education we're talking about. And I think that needs to be wrestled with much more openly and honestly than it is.
And it isn't happening because?
Well, because you have scattered college presidents and university presidents saying, I'm going to opt out. But it's never near enough, and then they don't really opt out, or they're lonely voices that aren't joined by others.
So how would it ever happen?
It would take a greater critical mass of people to be a little bit courageous and say, I'm going to design requirements at my college that may depress the interest of incoming students, that may I may not get quite as many applicants, my acceptance rate may go down, et cetera, but I'm going to do it because it's right. You need enough people doing that the sort of that enough people opt out of the chase for best of, that it becomes meaningless. Those
Are you opting out?
No, there's a very practical thing, and I'm very aware of the audience in some sense about the diversity of ourselves. There are very few of us in this room who are from the community colleges, which enroll about 45% of all undergraduates in the country. The most selective colleges and universities have exceptionally few transfer students in the main. If there were a united and concerted effort to significantly increase the number of community college transfer students to elite institutions, the effect would be very significant. One effect is it would depress the number of slots that you've got available for the students who are climbing through the elite high schools trying to get to you, right? It would open up the possibility that greater numbers of middle-class students would choose community colleges because we offer a really fine education, actually. And I think that one of the things that those of us in the community colleges are aware of, it can be either a source of annoyance or it's just an awareness, right, of the way in which the sort of class hierarchy gets replicated
in
sort of
educational
in just about most professional settings. And one of the things that I have very much appreciated about AAC&U is the degree to which we are genuinely colleagues with each other. We're trying to figure this out together and trying to talk with one another. So to the degree those of you who are from four-year institutions, whether you're small private colleges or big public institutions, to the degree to which you can walk out of here and think to yourself, I need to meet the people at the local community college. I need to know them better. I need to understand what they're doing and not think of them as the other in higher education. that we are you, you are we, and we're in this together, and it's really cool that we're in this together. Thank God we're in this together. There's my plea.
Well, I'm a little torn here now because we have only about 5 minutes, and I'm so trained to get off right on time. But I'm sure there are some questions. If we could take one or two short, focused questions, is that? Or statements, I guess.
Unlike us.
Unlike
us.
Is any? No. Well, it's a good crowd. They know they can't ask short, focused questions.
Where's the guy who quoted Nietzsche? Come on.
No takers. Oh,
There
yes.
are, there are.
I'm going to stand here maybe at the lowest level.
Okay.
I am a lecturer. I am not one of these presidents of college. And from my accent, I came here 26 years ago. I came to the United States 27 years ago. And actually, the way we put it, I came to give a better future for my kids. My father is from Lebanon, though my mother is American. So, but I identify myself like everybody will identify me as Lebanese. I would like you to go back to this country, Lebanon, and see what's going on. And, you know, it's a good time to say that, at the contrary, everybody is going to school now. In public education is like going like crazy. And I was reading maybe 2-3 weeks ago about 300,000 engineers and computer scientists computing from Lebanon to Dubai and Abu Dhabi to get that. So, and you know, like, and many of us, we emigrated, my grandfather emigrated to the US in 1890. So, and we are people of immigrant. At the same time, I'm so passionate because I've been teaching at Morgan State University, which is in HBCU. And you know, I'm so passionate, and I've been there for 20 years fighting for these kids because I didn't come from, I would say, underprivileged, you know, like I come from a family, doctors, engineer, whatever, you know, like brilliant Mayo Clinic. My son is a surgeon here, and my other son may be working research analyst. But at the same time, I would like my people at Morgan to have the chance as HBU, the same thing I had when I arrived here at the US. I came from France with a PhD, but I fought the first day. I am powerful. I got a PhD from Pierre and Marie Curie, theoretical mathematics. I came to Morgan, and these kids couldn't add. And for me, I struggled the first semester. What am I doing? I was teaching Newton methods for somebody who's in pre-calculus. But I learned quickly, and I've been there for 20 years, and some of us should really see that we can make it, and we are making it, and we are proud that we got a grant, maybe from the association a couple of months ago, I don't know, for $300,000 or $400,000. So thank you, and we shouldn't forget into the equation our HBCUs. And they are so important because when I sent my kid to Johns Hopkins when he was 14 and a half, I said if he didn't have 2 PhD kids, 2 PhD parents, he couldn't have made it, you know, because, you know, you need somebody. Sorry, it's not short. And this is why I said HBCUs are very critical because we feel deficiency maybe sometimes the way at your 2 years institution you do that. So I would have liked somebody to talk a little bit about HBCUs with your panel. And thank you so much. You know, I didn't want to talk, but when nobody talked, I said, let me jump on. And thank you so much.
I think I would just say that one of the real strengths that I think maybe American universities could own a little bit more is this recognition of diversity that exists in the United States. And so thank you for sharing that. I mean, I think that was a perfect example. I think instead of seeing it as a weakness, we should see it as a huge strength in this country.
Okay, we have someone down there.
Yes, thank you. It was a wonderful evening. I really appreciate you so much. And I would like to address and then ask you to address what I think we should do as universities. And you were saying that the faculty member who stands in front of the classroom and enthralls you in their knowledge and passion for their subject is what the institutions are really about. I think one of the major threats we face is and it happened in elementary, then it went to high school, community college, now the university, is the undermining of teaching. And the lack of teaching as being the focus, and our students as being the focus of what we do, as opposed to being in the classroom is what we don't want to do. Now, that is not true at the community college. The problem is the community college, they're teaching 5 classes a semester. The problem at the privileged UC's kind of system is the best you can get is 0-0 or 0-1, and everybody's fighting to get out of the classroom. And it's really about research, and it's really about, not that those things aren't important, but that and the Chronicle just had a piece on this, and one of the things they said that was really heartbreaking for me is, I, who have said to my daughter my whole life, oh my God, be a professor. It's the best thing. I'm sort of looking at her now saying, honey, I don't know. Because there are so many adjuncts who are scrambling to make it. It's a different world in higher education. And I think that is a major threat to what we're trying to do in higher education, in this teaching of democracy and teaching of ideas and challenging people to expand their mind. So
thank you.
That, I think, is a structural issue.
Anybody want to? Okay, go ahead. Yeah. Right here.
Thank you. I would like to be very brief and to challenge some people. And maybe these are things that we can all discuss during the social period afterwards. But in a rather optimistic vein, I challenge the notion that political correctness and protection of the students is really a dominant theme in higher education. I don't think we really are. I don't know about your institutions, but I don't know of any institutions that are banning Huckleberry Finn or The Great Gatsby. There are a few crazy places where some high schools have taken those out of libraries, and they are challenged. They're challenged immediately. If by nobody else, by the ACLU. And it seems to me that our students are being challenged. Most of the faculty want to challenge the students. I don't think political correctness is protecting them from ideas. And my impression is that they're doing Holocaust studies, they're doing global studies, they're doing all kinds of things that actually do challenge them, and the faculty are trying to do that. There may be many exceptions that I don't know about, but I have a wide experience. So I want to challenge that. And the other thing I want to challenge is the notion that I want to challenge your list of our problems. I've been persuaded by Steven Pinker and among others that violence is not one of our increasing problems, that there's less violence now than when we were children. There's less violence in the United States. We hear more about it, but that doesn't mean there's more violence. In fact, there's less. And I would add to the list of problems one that you didn't mention, and that is the denigration of the franchise. And it seems to be that many of our problems, many of our political problems, many of our social problems could be much alleviated if we all voted.
Can I say something?
Yes, of course.
It wasn't a question, but I'm really glad you said some of the things you just said, because I want to plead guilty as a representative of and member of the media, and I think you'll probably...
You're going to speak for me?
Well, I think you'd agree with me. I mean,
okay.
You raise a really good point. So there was an allusion made on the stage to trigger warnings. And I've read those articles on trigger warnings, and if you read them carefully, I think they were right to be written, but if you read them carefully, there aren't that many schools that are able to be cited as buying into trigger warnings. You mentioned violence, and it's true, crime is down in the country. We do, as a media, and I plead guilty and I apologize, we tend to focus on the exceptional, on the sexy, and then it sometimes becomes part of the conversation that is a national problem when really it is an interesting little strain of stuff that we have put on the front page of the New York Times.
I was not just mentioning I alluded to what you said because I do find even the few examples, and they're not very few, there are examples of, for example, in terms of the speakers, where they are constantly being challenged. But one of the problems, and it will need another meeting in order to go that into more depth, was when I came back was the ideological way that, for example, countries in my part of the world, the Middle East, were being treated. The way that, for example, all those countries were reduced to one aspect of what they were, which was their religion. And that religion was again reduced to one aspect of it, which was what the worst governments that are also our friends, and if there are enemies, they're becoming our friends, are most guilty of. So, honest to God, in most of the elite schools, I have confronted this, that when I talk about women and the history of women in a country like Iran or Turkey or Lebanon fighting for their rights, I am told that you're Western. That you're Western. That it is
Western,
their culture.
that it's culture.
You read, and you read this from credited professors, for example, in Duke, making amazing remarks about how women in the Muslim societies enjoy their husbands being polygamous because they don't have to service them. These are things coming from a person who's the head of Middle Eastern Association for Women's Studies. So that was what hurt me, and that was what I felt was condescending under the guise of being well-intentioned. So I should have most probably, gone much further. Otherwise, I accept what you're saying. In this society, we take one thing and we turn it into,
right.
huge scandal.
All right, and I will plead guilty as well, just to close the circle. Well, look, we've opened it up. We go on forever, but we do have to bring it to a close. So thank you all very much for listening. Please thank Azar, Frank, Brian, Kavita.
Nice job. Thank you, Jeff.
Thank you all so much. A splendid way to begin our centennial annual meeting and to close off our centennial. So where's that? Yeah. You guys aren't supposed to turn me off. Am I on now? Okay, all right. So thank you all very much. It was really a spectacular evening, and I'm very much in your debt. I want to take just a minute for those of you who are benefiting from this meeting to acknowledge my extraordinary staff. You have some idea of the huge amount of effort that goes into this kind of an activity. It has been all hands on deck for weeks, and I'd like you to just give a round of applause to my staff. And I would like to invite you now to the social hour, which will be on the mezzanine level, and where we will continue these discussions, and everybody will ask the questions of our panel, if you're going to join us, that you didn't get to ask tonight. I also want to thank, for support of this social hour, our annual meeting collaborating sponsor, which is LiveText. LiveText has been working with many of our member colleges, universities, and community colleges on strategic planning, but also on assessment of student learning outcomes, trying to go deeper into what's actually happening with students. We're very grateful to them for their ongoing support of AAC&U and for their generosity in hosting this social hour this evening. So we'll see you upstairs in the mezzanine, and thank you all for a very good beginning.